now comes to the debate on the Budget Policy Statement 2011. Craig Foss.
Mr Speaker, I move that the House take note of the report of the Finance and Expenditure Committee on the Budget Policy Statement 2011.
Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, first and foremost, let me acknowledge the members of the Finance and Expenditure Committee. The timing under which we considered this particular item of business and this report was in fact Wednesday post the Christchurch earthquake, Mr Speaker, and I acknowledge the way in which we dealt with that. Members have, as members can see from the report, have been able to express their policy and political views quite clearly, and Mr Speaker, I was actually in the earthquake itself the day before, and members were very good in assisting myself, the Chair, to get to the report to this House as it is now. Mr Speaker, I also note, if you look at, if members choose to look at page 5 of the report, paragraph 2, as we were considering the budget policy statement, we'd had the Minister and officials in front of us a few weeks prior to that, but if you note, members note in that comment there, I'd just like to read that, please, Mr Speaker. During our examination of these documents, the statements, budget policy statement, we considered carefully the likely impact of the September 2010 Canterbury earthquake. The events of 22nd February 2011 occurred just as we were completing this report. Our thoughts are with all of those who are affected. Mr Speaker, I'm grateful for members who thought and considered to put that into this particular document because events were unfolding as we spoke and as we prepared this, and again I acknowledge the goodwill of all to produce the document before us today. Mr Speaker, it is also very, very important to note just how important it is that the government is able to continue its prudent management, its transparency of the accounts and its rebuilding of the New Zealand economy. The investment statement, which formed part for the very first time of the budget policy statement, is a very, very good and useful tool as we decide various governments today and in the future start to prioritise their spending or make more informed decisions about how scarce capital, much of which is actually borrowed capital, can be allocated to the New Zealand economy. Mr Speaker, whatever the political hue of members, that is a very, very important document, and I strongly suspect it will form the foundation of further budgetary process papers as we are going through. It's very important because what it does, it brings a focus on each and every single dollar, borrowed dollar in many instances, that the Crown has. And events of recent weeks, financial shocks around the world, acts of God or nature of earthquakes down in Christchurch, just demonstrate again our need to keep our pencils sharp so we at least can allocate the resources, limited resources, financial and otherwise, of this country to the place of most need. Remembering that every dollar that is not efficiently allocated to whatever resource the government of the day decides is a dollar not available for social policies or to help rebuild the country in the case of tragic events such we've recently had, Mr Speaker. And I think it's a very, very important note. The budget, the Minister told us before the committee, the budget will ensure and continue and demonstrate prudent financial management of the public accounts. For example, the previous government had ongoing new spending increases, cumulative compounding new spending increases of $2.8 billion per annum over the last 5 or so years of the previous government. $2.8 billion. One of the first moves of the new national government was to bring that in to $1.1 billion. That's not a cut in spending, Mr Speaker. That's a cut in the ongoing increase of spending. And the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, in his evidence before the committee and in the budget policy statement, noted that in fact it is the intention this year with the savings and investment budget to bring that in to between $800 and $900 million of new extra spending every year. Remember, the total budget's about 70 odd billion, so that's new money every year. And yes, they're very large numbers, Mr Speaker, but it's very important to note it's the rate of growth that is changing and slowing down, because it is the rate of unsustainable growth of the previous administration, $2.8 billion extra dollars, new dollars slopping around the economy every year, which squeezed the rest of the economy out of the game. And the statistics, the metrics all show the same thing, that actually in the real sector, the tradable sector, the export sector, Mr Speaker, there was actually flatlining for the last 5 years of the previous administration. No real growth. Now that's what the numbers say. Because, well, why is that important, a member over there asks? That's important because that's the sector that creates the jobs, pays the wages, pays for families, and funnily enough pays that thing called taxes, which actually allows the government, whoever they might be, to allocate resources, finance, education, health, disaster relief, whatever it might be. That's where the money comes from, Mr Speaker. And when the government looks at its book and the money that's coming in doesn't match the money it likes, the spending it would like to continue with, actually what's the difference? It's in borrowing. And Mr Speaker, recent events around the world have put huge torchlight, daylight, sunlight if you like, borax on the need for prudent management of the accounts, Mr Speaker. That is why this budget is a savings and investment budget, because this budget will start to arrest, turn around and change behaviour in New Zealand because of the unsustainable growth of spending of the previous government, i.e. the squeezing of households. How did households react to their increased tax demands? How did households react to the increased demands of the Crown? They borrowed. They had to borrow and they ate the equity in their own homes. Now, when those homes were going up in value, OK, that might have helped, but actually the bills are now being sent to those same householders, homeowners, who had to borrow and consume their own equity to help them get through the previous years of the last administration. On the surface, it looked all hunky-dory, but the moment you scratched at it, the moment the global financial crisis started to hit, the moment a recession arrived, remember New Zealand went into recession 1 year before the rest of the world under the previous administration, the moment that happened, actually we're in trouble. New Zealand was in trouble. And that is why, Mr Speaker, this coming budget will start to address that. New Zealand owes $180-odd billion to the rest of the world. Some members opposite seem to say, well, it's not a problem because that's mostly private debt. Actually, when you are in the rest of the world, looking to lend down to New Zealand, it is the New Zealand denominated debt, which is the first port of call. New Zealand owes about $180 billion. When this government came in, the forecast was another decade of deficits. And that was before, to be quite fair, the tragedies of Canterbury and Christchurch recently. So, Mr Speaker, the need for this much more prudent and focused management, the need to help turn the economy around, away from consumption, away from borrowing and hope, is more paramount now than it actually ever was, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the savings and investment theme of this current budget, of the new budget coming up, as I noted, the investment statement, a very, very important document, will be contained in there. But I do need to raise a few matters that other members will probably raise in their various speeches. In the Finance and Expenditures report, Labor and the Greens members made it very clear of their policy intentions. To be fair enough, good on them. It's obvious whose points they were. Point being, every single one of those policies demands more borrowing, more taxes, more spending. Every single one of those is that same policy, that same failed policy that got New Zealand more into a bad place than it could have been otherwise. And they are trying to continue with the various announcements. I think they're up to about $5 or $6 billion so far. But one of their arguments in that they'll make later, I'm quite sure, their confusion of the difference between debt and their confusion of equity. And they're totally ignoring risk. Because one member, I believe, is of the opinion that anything that is exceeding the government's cost of capital should not be sold, essentially. Well, the other side of that argument, therefore, is anything that is not achieving, on a return, the government's cost of capital, therefore should be sold. Because if that's the case, then the members opposite are actually saying cash up New Zealand super. They're saying sell every housing asset in New Zealand. Because if they argue that you should sell or not sell everything exceeding the cost of capital, therefore they're arguing that you sell everything it's not. And look at the numbers, because they're actually mentioned right here in the investment statement black and white, hard numbers to make some difficult priority choices for New Zealand. I look forward to other members' speeches to clarify perhaps their intention that they don't want to cash up all those investments returning under the cost of New Zealand government capital. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader.